Before we dive into today's terrifying tale, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a spine-chilling story. Let's get into it. Haunted Morgue.
I work the night shift alone in a hospital morgue. As a janitor, I've seen, smelled, and heard things that would make most people's skin crawl. The morgue is a cold, silent place, filled with the echoes of lost souls and the faint, sterile smell of antiseptic. The flickering fluorescent lights cast eerie shadows on the tiled floor, and the hum of the refrigeration units is a constant reminder of what lies within. My routine is straightforward. Clean the floors, empty the trash, sanitize the surfaces, and ensure everything is in order for the next day. The tasks themselves are monotonous, but the atmosphere makes every moment feel heavy with dread. The morgue is at its eeriest during the night, when the hospital's usual hustle and bustle dies down, leaving an unsettling silence. I've been working here for a year, and while the job was disturbing at first, I eventually got used to it. But recently, things have taken a strange turn. It started with little things, a door that wouldn't stay closed, items that seemed to move on their own, and cold drafts where there shouldn't be any. I brushed it off as my imagination, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing night. Tonight, I can't shake the feeling that something is different. The air feels thicker, and every sound seems amplified in the stillness. I tell myself it's just another night, but deep down, I know that something is waiting to reveal itself. The night started like any other, with the usual quiet that seemed to seep into my bones. I was in my office, shuffling some papers, when I heard the distinct sound of the morgue doors swinging open. I looked up to see two attendants wheeling in a gurney with a body covered by a white sheet. "Got another one for you," one of them said, his voice echoing unnaturally in the empty space. I nodded and grabbed the clipboard from the desk, ready to do the paperwork. The body was of a man, recently deceased. The sheet covering him was slightly stained, hinting at the trauma that had led to his untimely end. I quickly filled out the necessary forms, trying not to dwell too much on the details of his death. After the attendants left, I wheeled the gurney to the row of freezers. As I opened the freezer door, a cold draft hit me, more intense than usual. I carefully slid the body into the empty compartment, noticing that all the other freezers were vacant. The funeral home had picked up the other bodies earlier in the day, leaving this man as the only occupant. Once the body was secured, I closed the freezer door with a heavy clank and locked it. As I stood there, an unsettling feeling crept over me. The morgue felt different tonight, more oppressive, as if it was holding its breath. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the sense of unease that was growing stronger with each passing minute. The silence seemed thicker, and the shadows longer. I returned to my office, the feeling of being watched intensifying. It was going to be a long night, and I couldn't shake the sense that something unusual was about to happen. After finishing up with the paperwork, I decided to take a break in my office. I always kept a chessboard on my desk to pass the time during the long, quiet hours of the night shift. The office had a large window that overlooked the row of freezer drawers, giving me a clear view of the entire room. I set up a game on my computer, moving the pieces methodically as I tried to distract myself from the unease that had settled in my gut. The hum of the refrigeration units was a constant background noise, almost comforting in its regularity. But as I played, I kept glancing up at the freezers, feeling that something was off. About 10 minutes into my game, I looked up and felt my heart skip a beat. One of the freezer doors was slightly ajar. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked over to it. The cold air poured out, making me shiver. I pushed the door shut firmly, making sure it latched this time. Must not have closed it properly, I muttered to myself, though I knew I had. I returned to my desk, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. I resumed my game, but my mind wasn't in it. I kept glancing up, half expecting to see something out of the ordinary. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the same freezer door was open again. This time, I knew it hadn't been my imagination. I had locked it. My hands started to shake as I stood up and walked back to the freezer. I could feel the cold air hitting my face long before I reached the door. I pulled it shut once more, making sure it was securely latched, and even gave it a tug to ensure it wouldn't open on its own. But the unease had turned into a palpable fear. Something was definitely wrong, and the morgue felt more oppressive than ever. I glanced around the empty room, trying to spot anything out of place, but everything seemed normal, except for the growing certainty that I wasn't alone. As I sat back at my desk, trying to calm my nerves, a sudden, deafening bang echoed through the morgue. The noise was so loud and unexpected that I nearly fell out of my chair. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously stepped out of the office to investigate. The sound had come from the direction of the examination room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see the dim light casting eerie shadows on the walls. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking ominously, and froze in my tracks. There, on the examination table, lay the body of a woman. She was covered by a sheet, but her face and one hand were visible. I could see the pale, lifeless features and the unmistakable tag tied to her toe. The sight sent a chill down my spine, and I felt my stomach churn. This woman wasn't supposed to be here. Only the man's body had been brought in earlier. I had checked the freezers myself, and they were empty. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight, my mind racing with questions. How did she get here? Who was she? Panic set in as I fumbled for my radio and called for security. My voice was shaky as I tried to explain the situation. You need to get down here now. There's a body on the table. It wasn't here before. It felt like an eternity before the security guard arrived, his face a mask of confusion and concern. He looked at me, then at the woman on the table. What the hell is going on? He muttered, more to himself than to me. Together, we examined the woman's body. The tag on her toe indicated she had died in 1994 at the Queen Royal Hospital. This made no sense. It was now 2016, and we were at the Dr. Wright Surgical Hospital. How could a body from 22 years ago end up here? As we stood there, trying to make sense of the impossible, a cold draft swept through the room, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I could see the same fear reflected in the guard's eyes. We were dealing with something far beyond our understanding, and it was becoming increasingly clear that the night was only going to get stranger. We stared at the woman's toe tag, the faded ink barely legible. It confirmed our worst suspicions. She had died in 1994 at the Queen Royal Hospital. My mind raced, trying to reconcile this impossible fact with the reality of 2016 at the Drive Wright Surgical Hospital. How could a body from over 2 decades ago just appear out of nowhere? Before we could process it any further, the lights flickered and a cold draft swept through the room. I blinked, and in that split second, the woman's body vanished. The examination table was empty, as if she had never been there. I looked at the security guard, hoping he could offer some explanation, but his face mirrored my own bewilderment and fear. "What the hell just happened?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I shook my head, unable to respond. We both stepped back, glancing around the room, expecting the body to reappear just as mysteriously as it had vanished. But the room remained empty, filled only with the oppressive silence and our mounting dread. Desperate for answers, I decided to check the freezers one more time. The guard followed me, and we opened each compartment in turn. Bay 1, empty. Bay 2, empty. Bay 3, empty. Bay 4, not empty. Instead of the man's body, there were only his clothes neatly folded, his toe tag resting on top. I turned to the security guard, but he was gone. I hadn't heard him leave, and the sudden realization that I was alone hit me like a freight train. I called out for him, my voice echoing off the cold, sterile walls, but there was no response. The radio, which had seemed functional minutes ago, was now dead, its batteries inexplicably drained. Panic set in, and I stumbled back to my office, my thoughts racing. Who was the man that had been brought in? How did the woman's body appear and disappear? And where did the security guard go? The questions circled in my mind with no answers in sight. As I sat there, trying to make sense of it all, a heavy presence settled over me. It felt like a weight on my shoulders, an unseen force pressing down on me. I began to feel thoughts that were not my own, dark and foreign, whispering in my mind. The realization hit me with chilling clarity. Whatever had happened that night was not confined to the morgue. It had attached itself to me. I could no longer stay in that cursed place. I gathered my things, my hands shaking, and fled the morgue, vowing never to return. But the weight remained, a constant reminder of the horrors I had witnessed. As I walked out into the night, I knew that whatever had transpired in that morgue was far from over. It had marked me, and I feared it would haunt me for the rest of my days.
The wardrobe.
I jolted awake, heart pounding in my chest, unsure of what had disturbed my sleep. The room was enveloped in darkness, and for a moment, I thought it might have been a dream. But then I heard it again, a faint, almost imperceptible noise coming from the direction of my wardrobe. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of it. It was a soft rustling, like the sound of fabric brushing against wood. Forcing myself to stay calm, I told myself it was probably just a mouse. Living alone had its perks, but dealing with pests was not one of them. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table, using its light to navigate the room. As I approached the wardrobe, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping up my spine. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the handles and slowly opened the doors. My clothes hung undisturbed, and everything seemed in order. I sighed in relief, chastising myself for being so jumpy. It was late and I was tired. My mind was probably playing tricks on me. Satisfied that there was nothing to worry about, I closed the wardrobe and headed back to bed, trying to convince myself that I was safe. I opened the wardrobe doors cautiously, half expecting something to leap out at me. But there was nothing, just the familiar sight of my clothes hanging neatly. I sifted through them, checking the back and sides, but everything was exactly as it should be. No signs of any intruders, no hidden creatures scurrying away, just silence and stillness. A wave of relief washed over me, and I couldn't help but laugh at myself. It must have been my imagination running wild, or perhaps the old house settling. The wood could creak and groan sometimes, especially at night when the temperature dropped. Yes, that had to be it. Nothing more than the house playing tricks on me. I closed the wardrobe doors firmly and glanced around the room one last time, reassuring myself that everything was normal. The unease from earlier began to fade, replaced by the comforting thought that I was safe and alone. I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and took a deep breath. As I lay there in the dark, I willed myself to relax and drift back to sleep. It was just a minor disturbance, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. Within minutes, the rhythmic ticking of the clock lulled me into a sense of calm, and my eyelids grew heavy once more. I was certain the rest of the night would be peaceful. I was on the verge of sleep when the noise came again, this time louder and more distinct. My eyes snapped open, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was unmistakable. The sound was coming from the wardrobe. The rustling was now accompanied by faint scratching, as if something or someone was moving inside. Fear gripped me. This was no trick of the imagination, no creaky old house. Something was definitely in there. I sat up in bed, clutching my phone tightly, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. My mind raced through the possibilities, none of them comforting. Gathering my courage, I dialed 911, my fingers trembling as I pressed the buttons. The operator's calm voice on the other end was a lifeline, grounding me in the midst of my rising panic. 911, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. There's something in my wardrobe, I said, feeling foolish even as the words left my mouth. I heard noises earlier, but I thought it was nothing. Now it's louder. I'm scared. The operator asked for my address and assured me that officers were on their way. As I waited, every second felt like an eternity. I kept my eyes locked on the wardrobe, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. The noises continued, more insistent and terrifying with each passing minute. I felt trapped, paralyzed by fear and unable to tear my gaze away. All I could do was wait and hope that help would arrive before whatever was in there decided to come out. The minutes felt like hours, but finally, I heard the sirens wailing in the distance. Relief washed over me as the blue and red lights flickered through my window. I rushed to the door, opening it for the officers who quickly made their way inside. "There," I said, pointing towards the wardrobe. "The noises are coming from there." The officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of skepticism and concern. One of them approached the wardrobe cautiously, hand on his holstered weapon. He signaled for his partner to stand ready. With a swift motion, he flung open the doors, revealing my neatly hung clothes. "Nothing here," he muttered, but the noise, now louder and more frantic, continued. "That's impossible," I whispered, feeling my heart sink. "I swear I heard it." The officer inspected the wardrobe more closely, tapping on the back panel. The sound it made was different, hollow. He turned to his partner. "Get the tools. This isn't solid." A few tense moments later, they pried open a hidden latch, revealing a false back. As the panel swung open, my blood ran cold. There, in the dim light of the flashlight, was a cramped compartment, and inside, hunched and glaring, was a man. The officers reacted swiftly, dragging him out and restraining him. I stood frozen, watching the scene unfold in disbelief. One of the officers recognized him immediately. "It's him," he said, his voice filled with horror. "The serial killer we've been hunting for months." I felt my legs go weak. This monster had been hiding just feet away from me, using the hidden compartment to evade capture. My home, my sanctuary, had been his hiding place. I couldn't comprehend it, couldn't process the sheer terror of what had been lurking in the shadows of my own bedroom. As they led him away, I caught a glimpse of his eyes, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of remorse. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I had been living with a killer, and if not for those noises, I might never have known. In the days that followed, my home became a crime scene. The police swarmed in and out, collecting evidence and documenting every corner. It was during one of these thorough searches that they uncovered a stash of blueprints hidden in the false back of the wardrobe. They were detailed plans of various homes in the area, each marked with hidden compartments similar to mine. It was clear that he had been using these secret spaces to evade capture, moving from one unsuspecting household to another. The realization was a punch to the gut. He had chosen my home, had lived within my walls, watching me. The thought made my skin crawl. The police assured me that he would never hurt anyone again, that he was behind bars and awaiting trial. But the fear lingered. I found myself jumping at every creak, every unfamiliar noise. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by endless nights of staring at the ceiling, replaying the events in my mind. The sense of safety I once felt in my own home had been shattered, replaced by a gnawing anxiety that refused to let go. But amidst the trauma, there was a flicker of gratitude. I was safe. He had been caught, and I was alive to tell the tale. The officers told me how lucky I was, how close I had come to becoming his next victim. The thought was sobering, chilling me to the core. How easily my life could have ended, snuffed out by the monster hiding in plain sight. As the weeks passed, I tried to reclaim my sense of normalcy. I installed new locks, reinforced doors, and even considered moving. But no matter where I went, the haunting realization stayed with me. Hidden dangers could lurk anywhere, even in the most seemingly safe places. My home, once a haven, had become a reminder of that chilling truth. In time, the physical evidence of his presence was removed, and my home began to look like my own again. But the psychological scars remained, a constant reminder of how close I had come to the brink of horror. I knew I would never forget the night my safe haven was invaded, nor the terrifying realization that sometimes the real monsters are the ones hiding in the shadows of our own lives.
The stain.
I woke up with a start, the early morning light filtering through the curtains. As I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, I noticed something strange on my left hand. There, covering my palm and fingers, was a dark, inky stain. I sat up quickly, trying to recall what I might have touched the night before, but nothing came to mind. The stain was unsettling. It wasn't paint or ink, at least, not any kind I was familiar with. It didn't smear or wash off when I tried to scrub it in the bathroom sink. Frustrated and a little unnerved, I decided to go about my day, hoping the mystery would solve itself. At work, I couldn't focus. Every few minutes, my eyes would drift to my hand, the dark stain a constant reminder of the inexplicable. I asked a few colleagues if they had ever seen anything like it, but they were just as clueless as I was. By lunchtime, I was growing more anxious. I retraced my steps from the previous day, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That evening, I scoured my apartment, searching for anything that might explain the stain. I checked every drawer, every closet, but found nothing unusual. Exhausted and frustrated, I sat down on the couch, staring at my hand. The stain seemed darker now, more pronounced. As I prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. What could have caused this? Why wasn't it fading? I turned off the lights and lay in the dark, my mind racing with questions. I hoped that by morning it would be gone, or at least that I would have some sort of answer. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my nightmare. The next morning, I woke up to a cold sweat. Groggily, I glanced at my left hand, hoping the stain would have faded overnight. Instead, my heart sank as I saw that it had spread, now covering my entire arm up to the shoulder. The dark, inky pattern looked even more ominous in the morning light. Panic set in. I had to get this checked out. I threw on some clothes and headed straight to the doctor's office, my arm hidden beneath my sleeve. The waiting room felt like an eternity, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When the nurse finally called my name, I rushed into the examination room, eager for answers. The doctor, a kindly older man, listened patiently as I described the situation. He examined my arm closely, his brow furrowing in confusion. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted, his voice tinged with concern. "It doesn't appear to be an allergic reaction or a skin condition that I'm familiar with." He ordered a series of tests, blood work, skin samples, even an MRI, but each one came back inconclusive. The stain remained a complete mystery. "I'm sorry," he said, handing me a prescription for a topical cream that he admitted was just a shot in the dark. "We'll keep investigating, but for now, all I can suggest is to monitor it closely and come back if it worsens." I left the office feeling more anxious than before. If a doctor couldn't figure it out, what hope did I have? The cream did nothing to alleviate the spreading stain, and by the time I got home, the sense of dread had only intensified. That night, I lay in bed, my arm aching and my mind racing. What was happening to me? Why was the stain spreading, and what could I do to stop it? The doctor's bafflement only deepened my fear. As sleep finally overtook me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was just around the corner. By the third morning, I woke up with a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. The stain had continued its relentless advance, now spreading across a large portion of my chest. It seemed to pulse with a dark energy of its own, defying any logic or reason. Fear gripped me like never before. I rushed back to the doctor, desperation evident in every step I took. The receptionist recognized me from the day before and hurriedly ushered me into an examination room. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the doctor to arrive. When he finally entered, his expression mirrored my own turmoil. He examined the spreading stain with a furrowed brow, muttering under his breath as he checked my vitals and reviewed the results of the previous day's tests. "I don't understand," he admitted, frustration creeping into his voice. "There's no sign of infection, no allergic reaction, nothing that would explain this." He ordered more tests, more invasive than before. I endured them all, clinging to a fragile hope that this time they would uncover the truth. But once again, the results came back inconclusive. The stain persisted, its origins shrouded in a baffling medical mystery. The doctor's uncertainty only fueled my panic. Was this some rare disease, a mutation of the skin cells, or something even more sinister? I couldn't bear the thought of what might happen if it continued to spread unchecked. That night, sleep eluded me completely. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the dark stain that seemed to mock me from my own body. Tears of frustration and fear streamed down my cheeks as I prayed for a miracle, for anything that could explain or stop this nightmare. The following morning, I woke up feeling drained and defeated. The stain had continued its relentless march, now covering half of my body. It snaked across my torso, down my legs, and wrapped around my arms like a sinister embrace. I couldn't hide it anymore, couldn't pretend it wasn't there. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, I returned to the doctor's office, my entire body now a canvas for the inexplicable stain. The receptionist's sympathetic glance only heightened my dread as I waited to see the doctor once more. He examined me in silence, his face a mask of frustration and concern. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice heavy with helplessness. "I've consulted with specialists, reviewed every test result we have, but we're no closer to understanding what's happening to you." Tears welled up in my eyes as the weight of his words sank in. There were no answers, no explanations. Just the spreading stain and the growing fear that it would consume me completely. That night was the worst yet. Exhausted but unable to sleep, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of terror and despair. At some point, sheer exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted into a fitful slumber. I awoke abruptly, my heart racing, to a surreal sight. My entire body was covered in the dark stain, from head to toe. Panic seized me as I stumbled out of bed, my thoughts a chaotic jumble of fear and disbelief. I needed to see the doctor, to find help before it was too late. With trembling hands, I hurriedly dressed and ventured outside. But as I stepped onto the street, confusion turned to horror. My neighbors, usually friendly faces I passed every day, stared at me with suspicion and fear. "Who are you?" one of them demanded, phone already in hand. "What are you doing here?" I tried to explain, to tell them about the stain, about my desperate need for medical help. But my words fell on deaf ears as they backed away, fear etched on their faces. Within moments, police sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer with alarming speed. Panic surged through me as I realized what was happening. I turned and fled, heart pounding, desperate to escape the misunderstanding that had turned my world upside down. But before I could get far, strong hands gripped my arms, forcing me to a stop. "Stop resisting!" a voice barked, rough and commanding. I struggled, trying to make them understand, but they wouldn't listen. They forced me to the ground, hands rough and unforgiving as they cuffed me, my protests drowned out by their accusations. As they led me away, I glanced back at my home, at the life I had known just hours before. Tears streamed down my face as I realized how quickly everything had unraveled, how easily fear and ignorance had condemned me. And through it all, the stain remained, a silent witness to the horror that had engulfed my life. I struggled against the officer's grip, pleading desperately as they dragged me towards the patrol car. "Please, you have to listen," I cried, my voice raw with fear and frustration. "It's not what you think." But their faces were cold and unmoved, hardened by suspicion and prejudice. They shoved me into the back seat, ignoring my protests and pleas for mercy. The ride to the station was a blur of harsh lights and accusatory stares, the weight of their mistrust crushing me like a vice. At the precinct, they threw me into a cold, sterile cell, locking the door behind me with a finality that echoed through my soul. Alone in the darkness, I huddled in a corner, tears streaming down my face as I tried to make sense of the nightmare that had become my reality. The hours stretched into eternity as I waited, tormented by thoughts of what awaited me. When morning finally came, I was greeted not by answers, but by a surreal sight. The stain that had plagued me for days, that had driven me to the brink of madness, was gone. I stared at my hands in disbelief, running trembling fingers over smooth, unblemished skin. It was as if the nightmare had never happened, as if the darkness that had consumed me had simply vanished without a trace. Confusion mingled with relief as the officers unlocked my cell and led me to the interrogation room. They questioned me again, their tone now tinged with uncertainty. "Where did it go?" one demanded, suspicion still lurking in his eyes. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice hoarse from tears and exhaustion. "It was there, covering me, and now it's gone." They exchanged glances, unsure how to proceed. After what felt like an eternity, they made a decision. They released me, their mistrust overshadowed by the inexplicable disappearance of the stain. As I walked out of the station, free but shattered, I couldn't shake the haunting question that lingered in my mind. What had happened to me? Was it a miracle, a cruel trick of fate, or something darker and more sinister? The days that followed were a blur of confusion and fear. I tried to return to my normal life, but the trauma of my ordeal lingered like a shadow, casting doubt on everything I thought I knew. The stain may have disappeared, but the scars it left behind were deep and indelible, a constant reminder of the horrors I had endured. I found myself questioning my own reality, wondering if anyone would ever believe the truth of what had happened to me. The stain was gone, but the memory of those dark days haunted me, a chilling reminder of the fragility of sanity and the hidden dangers that lurk beneath the surface of our lives.